Hello, right. Hi everyone. My name's Louisa. I'm just going to add Roger into the live for our chat. Here any minute. Hi, I'm all right, show. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, Roger. Great to see you.
It's working. The technology.
It is working. There's always a slight bit of nervousness about, is this going to work or not?
Yeah.
But it did.
So how are you?
Great to see you.
Are you good?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good,
Splendid,
thank you. It's a
splendid.
lovely sunny day. And
Yeah.
I've got a great view of the traffic going past
Yeah. Well, I'm in a basement
outside.
flat, so I've got a great view of nothing at all. So.
Okay. Yeah. Swings and roundabouts, I guess. So, anyway, it's great to see you. And I suppose hi to everyone who's tuning in. Hi, Alex. Hi, for the love of peanut butter. Great to see you. Hi, Animal Rights Show. I guess that's someone we know as well. Okay, so Roger, it's great to have you here. I'm absolutely delighted to be talking to you. It's always a real pleasure to hear from you and to hear you talking. So I feel really privileged to have you here today as well. So I just wanted to introduce you for everyone. So Roger has a PhD in sociology. He's a lecturer. He's been vegan for 42 years, so since 1979. And he describes himself on his Facebook page as a rights-based animal activist, agreeing with Nibert's entanglements of oppression and liberation thesis. So I might just ask you a little bit about that first to start with. So,
Just as a total coincidence, I have David Nybert's first book. So it's called Animal Rights, Human Rights, Entanglements of Oppression and Liberation. So that gets us into something which is a very big issue, but it's very relevant to what we're going to talk about,
yeah.
which is the fact that we've got the issue of could we get what we want within the capitalist mode of production? And Nybert's argument is that we can't. So we need to have kind of a revolution across the board, and the idea, the central thesis is that oppression across the board is entangled, and so that means that our liberation is going to have to be entangled. So it's not as though we're going to get animal liberation without human liberation, and we also wouldn't get human liberation without animal liberation. So it's got to come all together. That's what he's arguing.
So we talk about sort of intersectionality and pro-intersectionality.
That's right. Yeah,
So,
that's right.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's really
Although
interesting.
those are controversial terms in the movement, of course. But,
yeah, I was told to use pro-intersectionality or, to describe. So I think I've taken that out of my Twitter description now. But, I think I've changed it to anti-oppression.
yeah, it's better to say
it's,
pro than intersectionality, though, because of the fact that you're kind of giving credence to the origins of the idea, which comes from Kimberly Crenshaw. So it's better if you're going to use it at all. Pro intersectionality is probably best.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. That's great because I
My
think
first
we
bit of
see that a
advice.
lot, and I think it's good. So I suppose really, Roger, I was chatting to you last week. It was after you were on Eating with the Enemy, and then I heard you on Jerry Kelly on the Late Lunch as well.
Right, yeah.
Right? So and I know Jerry because I suppose I'm from that area. But Eating with the Enemy was brilliant, and I really just wanted to, I really just wanted to ask you about that. And I suppose I was watching it thinking, what's he eating? That's a really basic sort of thing. But like going to a hotel and going to a restaurant, like that must have been quite a big deal in itself. So I suppose, I guess you applied to go on the show, or did they approach you, or how did that work?
It just came out of the blue. They approached me. I don't know where they got me from.
Wow.
So presumably they must have had a researcher looking around on social media and thinking that this chap looks active, I suppose, as a vegan. And also, I don't know. I don't know whether they were looking for a particular type of vegan, if that makes sense, in the sense that they did say that it's a very clickbait kind of title, Eating with the Enemy, right? But they did emphasize that they're trying to encourage a discussion and some kind of maybe even consensus building. So they didn't really want a shouting match anyway. And so whether they picked me, as it were, because they'd seen other media things that I'd done, and I'm not the kind of shouty vegan, so maybe that was what it was. And I was actually pretty determined to not come over like that. But I mean, that's not my approach anyway. Yeah. But in regard to food, I mean, obviously, as soon as I started talking to their researchers and stuff, because they phoned me a few times. In fact, they've phoned me since then as well. They do a kind of like a trauma debrief type thing, and so the female psychologist on the show phoned me. I was actually back in Daylight Animal Sanctuary building a pigeon shed at the time, but with Declan, and so. But so they phoned me and I raised the issue of, well, obviously if we're talking about food, then that means I'm going to be conscious of where you're getting it from, and so we then started talking about whether we could get it from Govinda's, because I like Govinda's food, the so-called vegan slop that some people talk about, but I really like that. The great thing about Govinda's, when I came to Dublin, right, is that it was seen as a vegetarian restaurant, and now they've got a big sign and it says vegan and vegetarian. So it goes to show how much the movement has changed over the years. We're kind of making progress. So we talked about getting that, and then they said that their in-house chef was kind of conversant with plant-based meals and stuff, and so I made sure that they understood what veganism was, and they kind of made sure that the person was really kind of on top of that, and that things would be cooked in a separate way, and all those sort of things. But of course, that was my first dilemma, kind of, how much do I kind of make a fuss about the food even before I was even on the program? Because that's the kind of vegan dilemma, isn't it? Kind of, oh God, there's a vegan, so.
And had they sent you a menu, or was it?
No, they just say no. I don't know what happened with the other people, but I just laid down what the criteria was, and they said, "Oh, okay, we can sort that out." But right up until pretty close to the filming, I still thought we were dealing with Govinda's, but then it changed. So then I had what do I do now type of thing, and so I decided to trust them, which some people might have an issue with. I decided to do that, and I also decided that when I got the stuff, I'm going to have a good look and see what I can figure out. So mainly it was vegetables, and there was some kind of potato kind of thing, which was some kind of shapes and that kind of stuff, and then mostly things like falafel. So it looked okay. It certainly tasted okay. I didn't eat all of it anyway, and in fact it was it's a difficult thing to actually concentrate. You got the social distancing as well, so the person is quite away from you, and so you're listening to what they're saying, you're thinking about what you want to say, and then you're supposed to be eating as well. It was actually quite difficult in that sense.
Yeah, that would be quite difficult, I think.
Yeah.
I suppose the distance was probably quite good, because at least you didn't have to look at what your dinner partner was eating.
That was actually one of the factors. I thought if I was right next to them, I'd feel really comfortable about that. I mean, we've talked off air, as it were, about the Liberation Pledge, which I haven't taken, but I understand it. At the same time, because we're educators, it doesn't seem to be that viable as a tactic to actually say, I'm gonna kind of as it were, cut myself away from the rest of society, as it were. So I did kind of weigh all that up, and the distance was a factor, and I thought, well, at least I won't be able to see what the other person was eating, and I kind of knew what she was before the show. It's interesting because the editing of the show makes it look as though we were both surprised, but we They did a little bit of creative editing. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen, if you go onto Twitter and look at their adverts, for example, you get a lot of people saying things and people going like that, but they're not even the ones who are having a meal together. So it's all just edited together, so.
Yeah. It was really good though, and I think you did really well. You stayed so calm, and you got and I loved your final you know, bit with the like the liberator and the exploiter. I just thought that was fantastic.
Well, they
clear. And, you know.
they asked me about that. They said, you know, after you were so kind of reasonable, why did you say that at the end? And I said,
Yeah.
well, it's kind of true, but it just kind of popped out really. And and you know, I just thought, because I mean, I don't think I was thinking, well, this is getting too polite and we're getting on too much or something. But it just kind of occurred to me that we were looking at the same thing from two completely different positions. And then in the post interview, you know, because there was like three sections. Well, there's 4 sections. There was the walking up and down that silly hallway thing, right? That was one thing. That took an hour to film that. But then you had a pre-meal interview, which was really weird. They had this kind of almost like hide thing. It was like this black kind of thing with one little camera poking out of it, so you couldn't see anybody, and you just heard this voice, and you had to answer it. You know,
intimidating.
Yeah, it was weird. And then you did the meal, and there was lots of cameras about on that, obviously. And then you did another post interview in a different room, so you got moved around. It was very. I mean, it was very well done in a way, because nobody kind of met anybody else until you actually sat down at the table. And then afterwards, you were separated very, very quickly. And then so you never really got to interact except for during the meal, which obviously was heavily edited, because I think the meal took about 45 minutes as well.
Okay.
So.
Right. That's shorter than I thought it was going to be. I was sort of thinking that the whole thing must have been a lot longer.
Well, it took all the filming took all day.
Yeah. Okay. So Louise, the dairy farmer, at the end, when she was doing her sum up, she said something that I just thought I'd ask you about as well. And she said that she thought you'd had quite a lonely life because you've been vegan for 42 years. And, you know, would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, I think she was talking about the priorities of my life, and I suppose I have emphasized the movement. So if that's the kind of criteria, then well, yes. But I mean, I don't think it was lonely. But I mean, she was a very family orientated person, whereas I'm not. So I mean, I tend to see people in the movement as my family. You know, so kind of, you know, flesh and blood and biology doesn't matter to me as much as values and morality and all that. So if people share my values, I feel that, you know, I mean, like I used to know this guy who's now a barrister when I was in Liverpool in the 80s. And I used to regard him as my brother, whereas my actual brother, you know, he kills pigeons. He's got completely different values from me, 10 years older as well. I don't actually know if he's alive. So so family doesn't really mean it that much to me, and sociologically that's really interesting. The ideology of the family, no, blood is thicker than water and all that kind of stuff. I don't go with that, so never have.
And I think that's probably why, like, I've managed to stick with it as well for a while, because my parents are on board with me and my kids too, you know. And I think if I hadn't had that support, you know, when I was younger.
Yeah, well, my mum went vegan when she was in her 80s, so that was pretty interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
We nearly got my grandma died just before Christmas, and she was 94, and it took us. She went vegetarian in her 80s, and we just about got her to vegan. And then she had a carer coming in, so it kind of changed things a bit. But yeah, it is great to see people like who can make changes throughout kind of the life, you know, throughout our life.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Interesting with the age thing with my mum, though. Just to say this is that she was vegan because I did her shopping, but she used to tell her friends that she was vegetarian. You know, the other people in she had this kind of shared kind of building where they all had individual flats, you know, that kind of stuff. And so they used to go on day trips and she used to say to everybody that she was vegetarian. And I think it was because for her generation, being vegetarian was something that was known, whereas vegan was kind of new and kind of weird and stuff. So again, it's really interesting perception, you know, generational differences and stuff, you know.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I've come across that as well with people preferring plant-based. They can accept vegetarian, and plant-based, but vegan is like a whole.
And flexitarian you've got now. Don't forget flexitarian. You know.
Yeah, I'm not keen on
Don't get me started on that.
Yes. No, we won't go there. So,
No, no.
so I suppose, I suppose as well. So we talked about the food that you got on the show, so eating with the enemy. So I suppose on day to day, how have things changed for you, over the years? So you went vegan in 1979, and then, it must have been really difficult because there wouldn't have been like going into shops and seeing, products labeled vegan. So how did you manage it? And has what you eat changed over the years, or how you manage? Like, what's changed?
Well, the
Has
real
anything
answer to
changed?
that, the real answer to that is yes and no. I mean, obviously, there's loads and
Yeah.
loads of things that wasn't even around in those. I mean, like
Yeah.
we were talking. I realized I'd never had a non-vegan pizza, for example. I've never had one, And so, but pizza wasn't kind of part of my childhood thing, and also,
Yeah.
vegan pizzas are relatively new. So I've had a few of those, but I'm not that bothered. I'm not really bothered about the vegan versions of things. I'm quite simple in terms of food. I'm quite happy to eat a plate full of steamed vegetables. That's grand for me. And then even in relation to the vegan meats, sometimes it's the more kind of traditional ones like McCartney, which I still think is probably better in terms of some of the newer ones.
Yeah.
And some of the ones, the very new stuff, I've never even tried. I mean,
No, I haven't.
no. So it doesn't bother me that much, But so I'm quite a simple person when it comes to food, to be quite honest. And so
Yeah.
I just don't go for that kind of craving for anything or missing anything. In fact, in the 70s, I suppose you could say that some of the food was pretty bland. And
Yeah.
my ethics was a great help there, because I used to think, well, I haven't killed anyone. And okay, so it was a bit bland, so what? I haven't killed anyone. And so that would override the fact that you think, oh, well, that was a bit bland. And then, of course, you go, okay,
Yeah.
well, let's try and make it not so bland next time. But there's a lot of great food in those days. Also, I was part of an activist community in the 80s in Liverpool. And we
Yeah.
used to have this little cottage in a place called Dungeon Lane, which was surrounded by farmers' fields. So we used to have this kind of big cauldron on the stove on the go all the time with a stew in it. And whenever we needed to replenish it, we would just go out into the fields and pick a few carrots and potatoes and bring them back straight out of the ground, straight into the pot type stuff. And so I suppose that
Sounds like the dream for a lot of people. The good life.
Yeah, I worked on an organic farm once, and we used to have leek and potato soup made with leek and potato we just got from outside of the caravan, just literally outside. And it was just like heavenly. I mean, like the taste, it's four or five times better than what you can get from a shop,
Yeah.
So
Brilliant. So food hasn't really changed for you over the years. You're still like eating pretty
not
much.
much. Just all kind of basic stuff, mainly veg, and But I mean, I suppose some people might think, I'm a bit limited in that say, but it doesn't bother me. You see, it doesn't bother me. I always return to the ethics of it, and so long as I'm living in accordance to my values, I don't really care that much,
Yeah. Looks like your phrase for the Vegan Information Project is "Before you ask how, ask why." So if I got that, I think I've got that.
Yes,
right. So and it is. It's the why.
Yeah, that slogan was devised by activist called Steve Cooling, actually. But we ended up with a series of banners saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great because it really kind of catches people. It's like, it's not about how you do it. It's like once you've got the why, the how will be easy.
Yeah,
and that is really.
Yeah, we didn't go for the graphic images either. Although there is one where there's several fishers who are all kind of dead on this kind of plate, kind of like a boat, I suppose. And we wanted to feature fishers because obviously there's not much of a focus in the movement on the plight of fishers. Although ironically we've got Seaspiracy now, so.
Yeah. And I've spoken to lots of people, who've said, "Oh, I'm never eating fish again." And you're like, "Oh, did you see the bit in Seaspiracy where they, catch fish for animal feed for cows?" They're like, oh yeah, I'm not thinking about that yet. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean
yeah,
that was one of the things that is really interesting. When I was part of AR Zone, we interviewed Paul
yeah,
Watson of Sea Shepherd, and he wanted to come on first of all to explain that Sea Shepherd wasn't an animal rights group; it was a conservation group. But also the reason that they had a vegan element to it was the fact that the seas were being emptied by the farms.
yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's the
yeah,
same with the fish farms, isn't it? That a lot of the fishes in the fish farms are being fed fishes from the ocean. So,
yeah.
yeah, so
It's just horrible to think about. I sort of wonder how we ended up like this, but
yeah, well,
here we are. We
mm,
could keep it. So I suppose, yeah, we chat before we came onto the live, we were chatting about time in your life as well, when you said that people opted for the vegetarian option.
oh yes,
when
yes, yes,
yeah,
yes. I spent a
so
little bit of time at Her Majesty's pleasure, as they called it,
yeah,
and it was true. Yeah, that a lot of people went for the veggie option for the diet,
mm,
and it was generally known that the vegetarian diet in a prison was better than the general flesh
yeah,
diet. And part of that was that the screws used to steal all the best meat, so called,
yeah,
and so you would see them going out with a hold full of stuff. Because I was on a special diet, which was the vegan diet, obviously. Sometimes they used to mess up, so I ended up in the kitchen quite a lot. So I used to see what was going on, and
yeah,
so they had all the kind of best cuts in one area, which was like the staff canteen, and then all the kind of scraggy stuff, for the inmates, and then you had the vegetarian stuff, which was, I think it was probably heavily cheese based. So a lot of people went for
yeah.
that, you know. But obviously,
So did you get any recruits from that time? Did you recruit anyone to sort of ethical veganism?
um, I think we possibly did, because I was inside for a long time with Ronnie Lee, the co-founder of the
Yeah,
Animal Liberation Front. He's been vegan since 1972. So we were very heavily involved with the BYV at the time, British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. And there's one of
yeah,
their staff members, Mimi Spence. She used to send us, boxes full of books to give away. So we were giving books away all the time, and because some people were very curious. I've got this thing about people are vegan curious, but even back in those days, we talk about the 1980s now, people were very kind of curious. And, if you were able to give them a book, especially in prison when they had time to read the damn thing, as it
yeah.
were. Yeah. So it kind of was a good educational place, ironically, because of that. Mm.
Well, I'm sure it did. There probably are people from then who have stuck with it, because it would have been very difficult to get information then as well. I mean, now it's like just at the flick of a switch
Oh, yeah.
you can search things, and
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, I think it's fascinating thinking about the way that we used to do things pre-internet compared with now, when everything's on tap.
yeah,
And yet, ironically, the amount of knowledge that we've got is still up in the air, because, like, you can go to Google and you can, or other search engines are available, but you can do all that. But I mean, what quality of stuff are you getting on your screen?
well, that's it. And I think that kind of leads us nicely into something else we were talking about earlier. So we're talking about when you're shopping as a vegan, and I mean, I'm a single mum. I've been a single mum for years. I'm always shopping on a budget, so I shop in like basically all the supermarkets, and I buy all the special offers, and so it's always trying to do your best and buy the most ethical things that you can. And I suppose I think, okay, I'm not buying anything that's being killed, or I'm not buying anything that's from an animal. I'm not buying anything that another human has had to kill another creature for, And I suppose in my head, that's one thing. And I try to buy fair trade. And I suppose as I've been looking at this more and more, and it came up with chocolates actually over Christmas. We had bought some vegan chocolate that didn't have any fair trade or any sort of certification with it. And I started wondering about it, and it also had a huge amount of packaging, which is another thing you're looking at. And you were saying this, as well. You go into like one of the shops and you'll find something that's fair trade and it's like covered in plastic. It's like, how do we manage this as vegans? Like, how do we?
Well, I mean, the short answer to that is it's a struggle. I mean, Andrew Lindsay,
Yeah,
who was a theologian, animal rights theologian, he says that
yeah,
there's no pure land, and that unfortunately is the case. There is no pure place. Although, ironically, I suppose a veganic world where you had veganic gardening and veganic agriculture would be much closer to what we want.
yeah,
It's just that at the moment, when you've got to consume and just live your life as individuals or even in a community of vegans, it's kind of
yeah,
where do you go? Because there are some options where you can get the stuff in bulk, you can get the things without plastic. That tends to be quite expensive for some people. And that feeds into the thing about, oh, veganism is expensive. So that's a kind of problem in terms of what you advocate people do. Then
yeah,
it's great to be able to say, oh, there's loads of vegan stuff in Aldi, but then you've got, well,
yeah,
what is Aldi, in terms of ethics? And it's
yeah,
actually in Aldi where they have fair trade bananas, but they're covered in plastic. All the other ones are not. And so you're thinking, how ironic is that? You've got fair trade bananas, the product, but
yeah,
but that's the only one that they wrap up. I don't know why that is.
yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. Maybe the shelf life of an organic banana is not as good. So maybe that's it.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw something the other day about somebody, if you cover the bit where it's cut, that makes the shelf life. So maybe you're onto something there. That could be what it is.
I've solved the Aldi problem.
I know, but I know when I was in Aldi recently. I don't want to keep talking about Aldi, but I was, I got through because I don't usually shop in there. I live closer to other supermarkets, and I tend to go to the ones closest to me. And I went through the checkouts, and I sort of went over to pack my shopping, and I said, "Wait, what do I do with all this like cardboard? What do I like? I've taken all the cardboard off and all the plastic, and there was nowhere to put it. So it just goes into their main bin, and they said I contacted them afterwards, and they said they sort it and it goes to different recyclers. I don't know. So it is a real issue, and you're sort of constantly trying to do your best, and I suppose really I just keep thinking it's just about kind of consuming less all the time.
Yeah, well, in my Aldi, they have a big kind of bin thing, and people do go and take everything out of the packaging and put the packaging in the bin. So I'm assuming that is recycled. Yeah. So I think that's the case. And again, I always make this point because I mean, we were thinking we might get onto issues like vegans and cash crops and vegans and crop deaths, that kind of thing. But really, the solution is we need more vegans. Because like we can't, there are some systemic structural problems that an individual vegan consumer, as it were, or individual vegan, ethicist, whatever, can't do anything about. Whereas if we had kind of socio-political power, because our community was bigger, then we could. For example, in the 1990s, some joker sent me, thinking that this was an anti-vegan argument, this video of a North American prairie, and there was like 30 combine harvesters coming over the hill, as it were, as a big wall of machinery, and saying, what are the mice going to do there, kind of thing. And I was thinking, well, yeah, you've got a point, but there's nothing I can do to stop that happening. Whereas if our community was bigger and therefore stronger, then we could do something and say, okay, we don't want you to do that anymore. And we could even subsidize you not to do that. We can subsidize you to leave parts of your field unplowed or harvested, this kind of stuff. We can ask people to have like, avenues, in the fields. So there's a corridor out, that kind of thing. We could even suggest that they fit their equipment with, with sound devices, which would warn the other animals that they were coming, that kind of stuff. So we could really minimize what goes on if we want to.
Yeah.
But we need the power to do that, and an individual doesn't have that.
Yeah, because as you're saying, like vegans are motivated to do the least harm, you know, so we're more likely to come up with solutions that will do the least harm. It's not in the interests of the people currently farming who
Yeah,
aren't vegan.
it's so ironic, Louisa, because like you get a lot of people. You know, I'm doing this TikTok experiment at the moment. And you get a lot of people commenting, going, "Oh, what about all the crop
It's
deaths?"
great, by the way. Yeah.
and they go, you know, what about all the crop deaths, and what about this, and what about that? And we say it's not as though you're telling us something that we don't know about. It's just that, you know, we're trying to figure it out. But the point is, we're motivated to do that. You know, you're quite happy to eat your flesh and secretions.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, like, you're telling us off for the deaths that you say we create, but we don't want to create them, and we would do something about it if we could. You know, I almost like say to them, well, what do you think we should do then? You know, what's yours? I often do that on the street. They come up and they say, well, what about all that? And you go, do you have any ideas? I mean, I'm really interested in trying to stop that. Do you have any ideas? And they kind of, oh, you know, it's not my issue, kind of thing. But they want to raise it because they think they've got a kind of gotcha situation.
Yeah. There's a lot of the crops that are grown to feed animals who are being
most of them
pushed through the agriculture industry. So it's really kind of the relevant point in a way.
It's a totally disingenuous argument, to be honest. It's just that they think they've. It's the usual thing that they go to the periphery of the argument, and if they find a problem, they think that kind of destroys the argument, which it doesn't in the first place. But that's what they think, you know. Yeah,
it's true. So I suppose we were talking earlier as well about other, I suppose, alternatives to farming. You know, if we had a vegan world, maybe we wouldn't be, you know, using our land to grow, you know, industrial crops. Maybe we'd have other ways of doing it. And I think that was really interesting as well, as we've been talking about. Roger, you sent me a link yesterday, and I was like, oh, I've heard about that, and I think that does something else. But no, you had aquaphobia, hydrophobia, and sorry, not phobia, phonics.
That's right. Phonics, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Phobia, yeah.
Phonics,
yeah. Fear of water and fear of air.
Fear of water, fear of fire.
Yeah, so there was three things we ended up talking about. We were talking about aquaponics, hydroponics, and aeroponics. Yeah. So the latter two are kind of vegan. The first is not, in the sense that fishes are exploited during that. But I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, I used to actually run a no-dig veganic allotment in Dublin. And that was really good because we decided that we wouldn't dig into the earth and disturb the other animals in the earth. And so we had these kind of growing squares with veganic compost, which we had to import from England, actually, because there wasn't any in Ireland. So we had all that kind of set up. And we were thinking, well, you know, we can provide food, you know, in a much more kind of sustainable and ethical way. And so it's a question of then, could that be scaled up to a kind of, so, you know, could you get an agriculture rather than veganic gardening, which the kind of pioneers of the movement used to do? It's a question of how could we move that to veganic agriculture? That would be the political.
So is this different to permaculture, or is it kind of similar to?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar. Yeah, there was a big kind of the vegan movement in the, well, I guess 80s and 90s. They were very kind of linked with permaculture, and they used to have permaculture courses and stuff. I remember that very much, but I don't know whether it's exactly the same. It's a little bit like there's, you know, veganic agriculture is different from organic as well, because organic can be very problematic from a vegan point of view, which is really sad, because obviously organics have got a lot going for it, but in terms of blood and, you know, fish meal, bone meal, all that kind of stuff.
Like it's all like it's a kind of a minefield way of, you know, just you're trying to tread as lightly as you can. And
from my own position, Louise, this is interesting from my position, because I've always been opposed to political campaigning, because I think that until we've got cultural change, political change is impossible. and you only end up with animal welfare or something that doesn't really work and this kind of stuff. Because essentially you've got speciesists in a speciesist parliament passing speciesist laws, and we then go, oh, that's not very good. And you think, well, I wonder why, right? But the thing that could be a really fruitful move, I would think, right now would be for us to start thinking about subsidies and trying to move, move the EU or individual parliaments to think about changing the subsidies. So Declan Bowens is always is on about a couple of the members of the VIP are really interested in this subsidy idea, because what we really need to do is we need to pay farmers to get them to change.
To leave.
Yeah.
And to, to have, be able to change and to leave the land alone, or, to move away from animal agriculture, so that we're subsidizing.
It's the only way. It's not as though we're going to just shut them down. We've got to change them. It's like, it's not as though we're going to try and end the life of all the non-vegans and create, you try and make the non-vegans into vegans. So you're going to have to get the animal farmers into vegan farmers. I mean, there's no other way around it.
I always think about people I meet who are not vegan as pre-vegans, because they just haven't had the information.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. I've used pre-vegans. That's a good way of thinking about it. Oh yeah. Good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Because I think once you actually once you have the information, I mean, I can remember years ago thinking, oh God, this is on so many different levels. This just makes so much sense. It's better for me, it's better for the planet, and it's absolutely 100% better for all these animals and other animals. And I just thought that all I have to do is tell people, but it's not always that easy. You do need to kind of keep repeating it, I suppose.
Well, that's the basis of advertising, repetition, isn't it? So
and it definitely works for a lot of advertisers. So you're right. We do need cultural change, and I think it's really interesting about subsidies for farmers. I suppose something I've been thinking a bit about as well is because I'm involved in some climate change groups, just local groups, and it's all very, very local, And a lot of the groups, the focus first, and particularly the funding that comes from the government, is for changing people from fossil fuels to renewable energy or sustainable energy. When animal agriculture is responsible for almost 15% directly of carbon emissions, and a lot more indirectly if you add in deforestation. And it just it makes so much sense if we wanted to reduce our emissions.
But I mean we're in seaspiracy and cowspiracy areas there, aren't we? Because there are, the argument is that there are some advocates that don't want to go to certain places because the idea of selling that idea then becomes much more difficult. So to kind of veganize their claims making would, in their own eyes, become problematic. I think this is why XR and the animal rights movement are having a bit of a difficult relationship, in the sense that they've got just a different approach, and our position is a bit too fundamental, I suppose. But then again, that's the reality of the animal rights approach. We're fundamentally opposed to rights violations, and that's our baseline, and we don't want to kind of shift from that very much, if at all, of course.
I think it's I don't want to shift from it, because I think it's a really strong message, and I think you can. Still there?
Yeah, it's all right. I know. Pull my earphones out.
Technical problems.
Yeah, it's a technical hitch. That's right.
Yeah. But I think you can see the way that veganism is growing. There's a lot more interest now in veganism than there is in vegetarianism. I think there was a Board Beer report last year that showed that the interest is there in veganism. So that is growing. So the rights-based approach, and it's consistent, because if you're talking about the idea of veganism and exploitation, it's consistent, to talk about not using other animals.
Well, you did say before about this issue of some people like to identify as plant-based and flexitarian. And so I think that the job of vegans, as the movement grows, is to keep emphasizing the ethics, because there is a danger
Yeah.
that a lot of people are going to come into the movement, think it's kind of diet based or something like that, or even animals only, and they're going to get a kind of distorted view about what vegan philosophy is. So for the ethical vegans, and I know that's a problematic term, ethical vegan, but for the ethical vegans, their job really is to keep injecting the ethical argument into the sphere of what's called veganism. Otherwise,
Yeah.
veganism won't be veganism anymore. And so that's always the
Yeah.
danger. And in fact, social movement theory suggests that as a movement grows and takes off, then you get a lot of people coming in which don't necessarily have the same values as the people who founded the movement. And that's a great danger, because all movements want to grow. But the danger of growth is the fact that people come into the movement that, in a sense, don't really adhere to the values of the pioneers or the people who started it. Now, in some ways, that's not a problem, because movements move and they evolve. That's not a problem. But the thing is, it's got to be argued through. And for the ethical vegans, what we need to do is keep the ethical part of it as a big part of the argument and don't let it get sidelined. So, that's a really important thing for us to do. Again, it's the kind of how and the why thing. When a movement is focused on the how, it can forget about the why. Our job is to make sure that the why is there in front of people, but not least because the research suggests that those who have the more ethical view of veganism, they tend to stay vegan, because there is a problem. Tom Reagan is the author of The Case for Animal Rights, for people who might not know. But he says that a revolving door, there's a lot of people joining the movement. So we seem to be quite good at recruiting, but a lot of people leave the movement. So we don't have we don't have great success in retaining people. Now, the people who leave tend to be the health vegans and the environmental vegans. The ethical vegans tend to stay. So that's why the ethical dimension of veganism, which is the central part of it in the first place, is very important to keep kind of like center stage and never let it get pushed around. It's got to remain there,
So as I've seen a lot of people coming in as health vegans, and they become ethical vegans, and that's really
right.
nice.
That again, it doesn't matter how they come in, so long as they're exposed to the ethics at some point, and preferably as soon as possible. If they don't get exposed to it, then they can slip away again. So.
Yeah, you're right. It is really important. That's why I think it's been great to talk to you about this today. So to hear us on this channel is fantastic. So I think will we leave it there? I don't know how long we've been talking for.
Almost 45 minutes. So we could call it a day. If we get a lot of points and comments, we could do a part 2 if you like.
Yeah, and it would be great to do that. And I'm going to tag your TikTok. Your TikTok, Roger, is brilliant, and it's so funny. And I just think it's great to see the humour coming in as well. It's like it's great,
Oh, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I did because normally I do little clips and everything, but on this occasion I actually filmed myself and put it on TikTok, and then there's all these filters, like you can put makeup on and all that kind of stuff, and I'd done one with makeup and I didn't notice, right? And so I've got eyeliner and lipstick and all this kind of stuff. So it's I thought I looked fabulous myself, but it's interesting.
So it's that's really good, and I really liked your one in when you went around Tesco's as well. I think with someone, and you were looking in the cabinets. It's like, oh, that's vegan burgers.
Yeah, that's right.
But this I loved the most was the text on the screen. Obviously we don't endorse eating. Brilliant.
So,
brilliant.
Vegans don't necessarily eat all this rubbish all the time or something like that. Yes. Well, processed food, whether it's vegan or not, is. To be honest, there seems to be a growing. You'll have noticed this, I'm sure, Louisa. Seems to be a growing contingent of kind of junk food vegans in the movement now. Now, what are going to be the health, the health consequences of that 30 years down the line?
This stresses me out so much, and this is like the main reason I'm doing my food on Instagram, is because we don't eat we don't generally eat that stuff, you know. And I know I was talking to you about my daughter in school, and we've had problems getting vegan food for her. And so they started buying her like vegan meats, and she's sort of looking at them going, what's this, you know? But it's like, when I sort of go into supermarkets and I'm thinking, oh yay, vegan products, brilliant, and then at the same time going, oh gosh, you know, we really need to learn how to cook. You know, it's all about, you know, learning how to cook, and it's easy. And I mean, we eat really simply, like I think you do as well. Like we eat the same food all the time. I have porridge, I have soup, and like stews and curries and rice.
Yeah,
and
we vegans are so boring,
really
aren't we?
easy.
We're so boring.
I know. But you know, I love food, as you can see. So, it's like,
well, I'm not
yeah.
going to comment on that, Louisa, so you can forget that one.
Thanks, Roger.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I suppose leave it there for today, and I would say thank you so much.
Yeah.
And,
So
just,
internet land, if you're enjoying this and you want a part 2, let us know and we'll do.
Yeah.
Yeah, about that. We could do that.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Take care and bye, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Bye. Bye.